But then, like I said, things happen in prison. There was a assault on staff. I was inside my cell. The assault took place in the chow hall.
Hmm.
4 days later, I'm being handcuffed, being taken to ADSEG, saying that I was one of the guys that assaulted the officer. And I'm telling the sergeant, I'm like, Sarge, your officer counted me inside his cell when they did count. So if you go back and you check your account, you're gonna see that I was sitting in this cell when
Hmm.
this took place. So how can I be in two places? No, well, you guys want to assault my office, or you're going? Here I go again, another 3 weeks in that say for something I didn't even had nothing to do. The same story, Jen. We're
Yeah.
sorry. We looked at the video, we looked at the IDs, and we realized that we made a mistake. So now
Hmm.
you just need to go.
Mm.
Most of the property was thrown away because they were upset, so they threw everything on the trash. I lost a lot of pictures that I will never get, but they don't care about none of that. They don't realize how that affects, even in the process when you're trying to change, how
Yeah.
that could stir you up and guide you in the wrong direction, back again, because now they're messing with things that are valuable to you.
Yes. Your personal, like that's your family. I can imagine that could really trigger you to have a negative reaction and take a step back from your positive change.
I always tell people, it's really hard to change in prison. A lot of people say, oh, well, you should just change. But there's so many things that happen in prison that it's not impossible,
Mhm.
but it takes a lot.
Yeah.
So they sent me to another yard. I just continued doing my time. Um, then from there, I was able to drop to a level two. And before that, though, there was a wholesale extraction because they were moving us from one yard. So
Mhm.
here comes another write up. So I'm just stacking all these write ups up in my thing, for
Mhm.
violence, things that I didn't have nothing to do, but they're just stacking up.
Right.
Like I told you, in my mind, I was like, they're never going to let me out, so I don't care.
Mhm.
I get this paper, or you're going to your parole board, your first parole board. And I was just like, okay. I was like, let me get dressed up nice for these guys and everything, because I don't know what they're gonna want. You
Right.
know, I and it was funny because during that time I was able to see my mom. I was able to ask my mom for forgiveness. For the first time, I let my hair grow because I used to always shave my head. And around 2008, I started letting my hair grow. And when my mom came, she started crying. She was like, "You look like the man that I always thought you would look like. Your hand." She started like going on, and I was just like, "Okay, mom." But I told her, "Mom, I apologize." It was the first time that time I apologize for every tear that you have cried because of what I've done. For every hurt, every bad night, which is every night. I was like, "I'm sorry," and all those things that happened in the past, Jen, went out. It was that connection, mother and son, that I wish I could have had when I was a child.
Right.
Prevent a lot of things from happening, but it was happening now. And I was almost 30, and now I just like my mom is like the love of my life. And she was like, "You will always be my baby." She was like, "You always be my baby," and it's just like all these things are putting, being placed, being being put in place for me to make it, to do things different. And now I get sent to level two.
Okay.
And once I'm in level two, you start hearing things like, "Oh, the law's gonna change," and there's people fighting for the youth offender and all these things, right? And I'm just like, okay, I'm like, until I see it, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
But one day they're like, the law's gonna change. That one was SB 260, which
Mhm.
was 18 and under.
Right.
And I was like, man, and I'm going to the board, right? So I go
Mhm.
to my first board here, and it just went really, really bad quick.
Oh,
You're
really?
this, yeah. They were like, "You're this, you're that," and everything was bad.
Mhm.
The commissioner said, I'm gonna give you 5 years for you to think about," and it was just like 5 years. I'm just like, what are you talking about? Like for me, I was like, you're just giving me years, like it's just like drinking water, right? And he was
Mhm.
just like, well, he goes, it's for you to think about. And I remember on my graduation, they invited that commissioner, and we made eye contact, and it was just like, I didn't know what to tell him because he really gave it to me during the hearing. He was like, "Man, you have to work on this. You have to work on that." And
Mhm.
I told him, I was like, "For what? Like, you guys are never gonna let me out." I was like, "Why am I gonna do all these things?"
Mhm.
And he was like, "It'll do good for you, man." He's like, "Just do it because it's the right thing to do." And I go to level two, and little by little, I remember one guy. He is like, "Hey, let me talk to you." He's like, "You ever want to go home?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "The first thing you gotta do." He's like, "You gotta stop going by your nickname." He's like, "Your nickname has to go if you really want to change." And I was like, "My nickname has been with me forever. Like, what are you talking about,
Yeah.
right?" And he's like, "You gotta start detaching yourself from the things that brought you to prison." And I
Mhm.
remember I went like this, like to shake his hand, and I said, "Well, my name is Carlos." And he's like, "Okay, Carlos, I'm so and so." And he goes, "But you got to tell your homies that they call you Carlos." And I was like, so I started telling people, "Hey, don't call me this, just call me Carlos." And
Mhm.
everybody was like, "Okay, whatever." They'll call me by my nickname. I was like, "Man, just call me Carlos. Like, why is that hard? That's the name that my mom gave me. Like, just call me that." And within a year, we start seeing people, starting, like coming back and saying, "Hey, I was found suitable." And at that time, you're like, they are letting people go home. There's hope.
Yeah.
There's hope, and the things that you never thought could happen are starting to happen. And I was like, man, I gotta get in these programs. I gotta do this. And the
Mhm.
same guy that came and told me, "Hey, you gotta stop using your nickname." He goes, "Hey, let's have a conversation tonight." I was like, "All right, cool." I didn't know that he had done a lot of work on himself. You know.
Mhm.
So we're sitting in the day room. It was like probably like 11 o'clock at night. And he's like, "Tell me about yourself." So we start talking, and he just started hitting things. Within 20 minutes, I was just crying,
Yeah.
crying and crying. And he was like, "This is the beginning for you, man, to let go.
Mhm.
You gotta let go of all these things that have been holding you back." And man, those tears, Jen, at the end, it allowed me to start the process of being free from within. Physically, I was in there, but the process of me releasing myself from all the prisons I had emotionally and mentally,
Mhm.
it was taking place. And it happened from one homie to another homie, two people doing life.
That's beautiful.
Nobody else involved. It's just two men talking and having
Yeah.
a conversation. And from there, I started signing up to different groups. So I was doing all these groups, and then people started inviting me. They were like, "Hey, man, would you like to be a co-facilitator?" So I
Mhm.
started doing a lot of facilitation, and I remember I started CGA, speaking to 12 people. Then we started bringing in more people. Next thing you know, there's like 50 people we're talking, and one of the guys was like, "Don't let Carlos talk because he could go on for hours." He's like, he could talk for 3 4 hours without stopping. But I was just trying to tell people what I was realizing now, how my actions had impacted so many people. Like,
Mhm.
and starting with my victim. It was during that time that I said, I didn't kill the gang member. I didn't kill somebody from that neighborhood. I
Mhm.
took the life of a human being, somebody's child, an innocent person. It didn't matter if it was from another gang. He didn't deserve to go through what I put him through.
Yeah.
And it started with him. Recognizing and acknowledging him and making amends to him by simply saying, "Hey, I apologize. I know I cannot bring you back. I cannot change,
Mhm.
but I will honor you by recognizing and letting others know that it was wrong what I did to you. And therefore, I must accept to the responsibility for the hurt of your family, the community, my family, like the ripple effect that a crime takes place that a 15-year-old doesn't comprehend at that time.
Right.
You do know right and wrong, but you don't have this understanding that takes years and years after. So for me, that's what happened. I started like recognizing who have I harmed, who was a victim, who has been impacted by my actions directly, indirectly.
Mhm.
And I just took off. It just bring surrounding myself with positive people. But like I said, Jenna, I'm not perfect. I stumble. I got
Hmm.
myself caught up, got another write up, and I found myself in that safe. That was 2012, and it was one of those feelings that you're like, man, I was doing so good, and I just threw it all away. Like,
Mm.
now I'm not blaming the off. I'm blaming myself. I'm just like, what
Yeah.
a dumbass. You know, you
Hmm.
took one step forward, now you're taking two back. Like, you will never get out. And at this time, I'm in Chakawala, and the cell had a window, and I could see like the desert, and you could see the stars. And I didn't have nothing, right? And I started like looking around the cell, and I look on top of the lockers, the thing that never left me, one Bible.
Mm.
There was nothing in that cell but one Bible. And I remember I pulled it out and I said, "You have never left me." Because in my darkest moments, in every moment I thought, it's over. Let
Yeah.
me take my life. Let me do all. The word was always there.
Yes.
And it was always there to encourage me, to bring me back to, be positive. And it was like calling me, like, start
Hmm.
looking for me, stop
Right.
focusing on everything else, and come to the one that has always kept you safe.
Yes.
So I read it, and I was found guilty of the write up, and they were like, "Well, we're gonna ship you out," and I'm just like, "Here we go." And I went
Hmm.
to different prison in the whole 24-year term. I mean, I haven't even said, but I spent 22 years in CDCR and then 2 years in detention and immigration.
Hmm.
So it's a total of 24 years. And, you know, the other day I was reflecting on my life, and I was like, I remember just looking back and saying,
Hmm.
man, I was 15 years old, and now I'm 43 years old. And it just went like this in a flash.
Right.
I always tell the young people that I talk to, we're only one bad decision away from throwing everything. So it's really important
Yeah.
to stop and think. Because you just don't know. A lot of people will say, "Oh, well, that would never happen to my kid or that." And I was like, if you ask my mom, she would tell you the same. I would never. My mom would be like, he was so nice when he was little that I would never think that he
Right.
would do something like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
One poor bad decision. So I get I'm over here saying, well, I want to go to this prison because I hear they have all these things, and I have
Hmm.
my, but the Lord had different plans for me. And I was sent to a prison that I didn't want to go. So that's Avenel. I go to Avenel, and there's this officer that hated me for years from Pelican Bay.
Oh no.
I see him, and he's like, "Oh man," he's like, "No wonder I recognize your file." And he's like, "Well, you know what? I'm gonna put you on this yard and everything there." And I was just like, "All right, cool, whatever's right." I'm like,
Hmm.
I'm not thinking, but I had like five different enemies on the yard that he was sending me to. So he was setting me up because he was like, "This dude has done this. Dude, they're gonna do him now."
Hmm.
And this other officer walks in, and he's like, "Oh, well, who you got for this yard?" And he's like, "Oh, well, him, right?" And he looks at my file, and he's like, "You checked this file?" And he's like, "Oh yeah," he's like, "Well," he's like, "It says here," and he starts like, "Man," he's like, "This is probably not gonna be good in that yard, man. He's like, he has too many enemies on that yard." And
Hmm.
the sergeant heard, and the sergeant's like, "Let me see his file." So the sergeant pulls me out. He's like, "Hey man," he's like, "How old were you when you got arrested?" I was like 15. He's like, "So he's like, you were raised in prison?" I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Do you know that you have a lot of enemies on that yard?" And I was like, "No, sir." I was like, "This is I'm just here. They sent me here, and I'm here."
Hmm.
He's like, "Are you looking for trouble?" That was He's like, "Are you looking for trouble?" And I said, "I'm just trying to do my time, sir. That's all the time. I'm like, I'm getting older. I just got myself in trouble, and I'm like, I'm just trying to find a way to get started again." He's like, "Okay." He's like, "I'm gonna send you somewhere else." He sent me to this yard, which was 5 yard at that time, and I ran into somebody I knew for years and years before, and
Hmm.
I called him by his nickname, and he looked at me. He's like, "Don't call me that." He's like, "Call me by my name." And I was like, "Oh, he's changed, you know." And
Yeah.
then he goes, "Not only did I change, but he's like, I'm a Christian now." And he's like, "God loves you." And I was like, "Okay." I was like, "I remember you when you were." He's like,
Yeah.
"I'm no." He's like, "I'm no longer that." And
Hmm.
we started talking and everything. And he's like, "You should talk to these people." Like he started guiding me, right? He's like, "They have this program here in this yard." He's like, "They have this program here called YAP." And I was like, "Well, what is it about?" He's like, "Youth Adult Awareness Program." He's like, "They bring kids from the Fresno area, from the LA area, from different school districts. They're at risk
Yeah.
of going, end up, in juvenile hall or going to prison or stuff like that. They
Hmm.
bring them here and they talk to them." I was like, "All right, cool." And I sure, I went and I spoke to one of the guys, and he was like, "Okay." He's like, "Well, let's have an interview. So we're gonna bring you in and we'll talk." I went, I did the interview, and they were like, "This guy is good." They were like, "Because he fits the
Hmm.
work for somebody that's been in here since he was a kid to talk to all these teenagers." The first time I sat across a kid that they brought in, I was just like, I just saw myself in him. Parents working all the time. Kid had suffered a lot,
Hmm.
hanging out with the wrong crowd, and he was like, "Man," he's like, "I just wish I had my mom with me more." He was like, "She's never home," and I spent the whole day talking to him, and I was like, "This is what I'm gonna do." I was like, if because at the end, the kid was like, "Can I give you a hug?" And he gave me a hug, and I told him, "Make sure you go back and you tell your mom that you love her and that you're gonna do good."
Hmm.
And he was like, "I will." He's like, "That's the first thing I'm gonna do. I'm gonna give her a hug." And after that, the principals and the school teachers, they write letters to us and let us know. And one of the teachers like, "Man, the first thing he did, he gave his mom a hug." And doing that program, I realized that this for many people is a matter of life and death,
Right.
because these parents were sending their kids as like a last. This is our last shot. Your son is already this. He's involved in this, and he's gonna end up like this. So the only thing we have for him is for him to go and spend a day with all these guys that are locked up for murder, doing life, and they've
Hmm.
been forever.
Right.
And I can only imagine how a mom and a dad have to be feeling to say, "Let me sign that paper and send them."
Yeah.
So I understood that it was a matter of life and death, and I took it serious. I was like, we have an opportunity here to work with the community
Hmm.
and be able to give these kids a better opportunity in life, by simply sharing our past so that it doesn't become their future or their present.
Right.
And we did. We worked with over, I think it was 300 to 400 kids in the time that I was in. And the majority of them changed. They got their life together. And like I tell people, it was rewarding knowing that there was a mom and a dad outside that they were happy that their kids were changing. At the same time, there was one less crime, one less victim. So we're doing all these things that allow us to connect.
Yeah.
This is the importance of doing the right thing.
Hmm.
We're not getting paid for it. It was just something that we were doing.
Right.
And of course, in the process, you start realizing that it gives you purpose in life. Because I started saying, I might never get out. I might die in here, but I'm gonna save somebody's life out there.
Right.
And that's the best I could do.
Yeah.
By this time, I already been to board 3 times, and on the third time, I had one of the most serious commissioners. I'm not gonna say her name to respect her privacy, but she was known as a very vicious commissioner.
Okay.
I got up at the hearing, and the deputy commissioner comes out. He's like, "You sure you want to go in there with her? Because she's ready to give you a 10-year denial."
Oh.
And I was like, I was like 10. I was like, I
Yeah.
was 5. Like, come on, man. He's like, "I'm serious, dude." He's like, "You have to think about this." And excuse me, I was like, "I'm ready to own up to everything that I've done." I told him, I have to take responsibility for my actions,
Mhm.
and if it's gonna take 10 years, I'm ready to do it. And he's like, okay. So I went in there, and we went at it for like 4 hours.
Wow.
And at the end, the lady said, man, she was like, I was ready to give you a 10-year denial. And she was like, but she goes, you have come clean about everything. She was like, I thought you were gonna come in and deny and fight and argue and oh, is
Mhm.
this and that. And he's like, I think you're onto something, she said. But she's like, I'm not gonna let you go home because I think you need to work more on yourself. And I was like, okay, and she's like, so I'm gonna ask you to do therapy. And my
Mhm.
first reaction was like, I'm not crazy. I'm like, what are you doing? What are you talking about therapy, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, seriously, excuse me. She's like, seriously, I think you need therapy. She's like, there's something that you're not telling us that I know is really hurting you inside. And
Mhm.
until you let go of that, she's like, you will find your freedom. And of course, I knew what she was talking about, but it was so it was so deep inside that I was like, it's gonna take a lot to bring it out.
Yes.
I went back motivated, and I went straight to the medical department, rang on the bell in the office, like, you got to duck it. And I was like, no, but I need therapy. And he's like, therapy? And I'm like, yeah, I need therapy. The commissioner just gave me a 3-year denial,
Mhm.
and they said I need therapy. So he's thinking, oh, this is depressed because he just got a denial. So I'm gonna have him talk to one of the doctors.
Mm.
So, with this amazing doctor, uh, who brought her partner, which was a social worker, and they're like, "Oh, what happened at the denial?" So I'm just like explaining, and I'm like, and then they say I need therapy, and they're like, "You're not depressed or not?" I'm like, "No, I'm motivated. I'm trying to do the right thing." But
Right.
oh, we thought you were. I'm like, no, I'm like, I just need help.
Yeah.
I'm like, I've been in here since I was 15. If I ever get out, I don't know what I'm gonna do outside. I don't know how I'm gonna react,
Mhm.
and I want the best version of me to be able to go out. And if I don't go out, I'm like, I do all these programs that I want to be the best version of myself so that I could help somebody else. And both of them were like, we're gonna find a way to to give you therapy, because they're like, if you don't take medication, they're not gonna want you to take therapy. But
Mm.
we're gonna have to talk that you spend so much time in here that even though you don't acknowledge it, you
Right.
probably have suffered from depression.
Mhm.
If you ever get out, you ain't gonna know how to act out there.
Mhm.
So they made all these things up to say this guy needs therapy,
Right. Okay.
and it was hard because what's it called, the gang unit, they were against it. They were like, nope, this guy don't need none of that, because for some reason my history from Pelican Bay followed me everywhere.
Wow.
Every prison I went to, it was like, nope, this guy is this guy, even though I was already in the process doing my work and everything, to them
Mhm.
it's like nothing for him, right? And this therapist fought for me. They were like, look, the commissioner said it is in paper and he
Mhm.
needs therapy. They approved it, and here goes Carlos into therapy, right? And everybody's like, where are you going? I was like, therapy. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, Carlos is losing his mind now. Yeah, everybody was like clowning, like, are you okay? Are you hearing voices? The denial is getting to you. By this time, Jen, I full blown facilitator. A lot of the classes that I've taken, now I become the facilitator with a group of other guys, and we're working to help people out.
Mhm.
Uh, everybody was like, "Why do it, Carlos?" And I was like, "We have to make sure that the people that's getting out goes out and actually does make amends to other victims, and the
Mhm.
way we're gonna do that is by helping them from within, so that when they get out, they're prepared and they're out there always remembering that they have to honor the victims, and
Mhm.
do it is by living a better life than the one that brought them into prison." So a lot of people are like, man, that's it, like that's what we got to do. So there was like groups of people. Like, I used to get up every day at 4:30 a.m., had a cup of coffee,
Mhm.
water, watch the news, and by 6 o'clock the day started, trying to help people out.
Mhm.
didn't stop till like 10 o'clock. It was like group after group. Uh,
Mm.
I was given the opportunity to become a mentor in the substance abuse program, and it was just like doors opening for me everywhere. And it was because of my actions. Like I was proving people that were like, man, this kid that everybody was saying that would never change, that he was dumb, has educated himself, has worked on himself,
Mhm.
and the only thing he wants to do is help people out, you know. And there was a lot of people, because I always tell people, right, we talked for many years, I believed it was us against them, us and the officers.
Mhm.
But there was a lot of officers that were amazing people that even today I'm working with some through this fellowship with UCLA,
Mhm.
which is doing the Youth Justice Reimagine. And there's a couple of former correctional officers that we have become really good friends, you know, because I always told them, yes, I met some bad people because there's bad everywhere, but I
Mhm.
met some amazing officers that wanted us to program, treated us like human beings. We're always
Mhm.
like, hey, good morning. You know, some of them were like, I don't shake your hand because I don't want them to, you know, get on me. And you understand those things that happen, you know. And but there's some really good officers. And in Avenal, that's what started happening. You know, this officer and the substance abuse is like, hey man, I want you to take the program, but then you could become a facilitator or a mentor. And
Mhm.
you know, I went through the whole substance abuse program, and then I started, you know, doing the groups and everything, right? So all everything's going good. I'm going to therapy. After a year being in therapy, Jen, uh, the counselor, the social worker tells me, "Hey, do you have pictures of yourself when you were a kid?" I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "If you don't, just collect them, like bring them to me."
Mhm.
I brought all these pictures, right? And she's like, "Put them in front of me." You know, so I put all the pictures in front of me, and she's like, "You're happy in all these pictures, right?" And I'm looking at the pictures, and I just see like this smile on my face and everything, and not even realizing that she had separated them from when I was happy to when she saw that something had changed in me. And she just said, "Carlos, what happened here? Why the blank stare? Why you're no longer smiling? Why you look sad?" And when I looked at that, then it was just like going back to when I was that kid, being afraid, being hurt, and just saying, man, all I wanted to do was give hugs to people and be friends with everybody.
Yeah.
And these people was hurting me. So, you know, I looked at that and it was like, man, you know, I was like, that's it, you know, and I just started crying and sharing. And she just, you know, allowed me to get it out.
Mhm.
It's like, this is the beginning, Carlos, of your healing process. She was like, it's not your fault. It was never your fault.
Right.
You know, and now that you recognize, she's like, we're gonna work on it, and
Mhm.
you're gonna get better at it, and you're gonna be able to help a lot of people that goes through this. And it did. It allowed me to help other people.
Mhm.
It allowed me to, you know, heal on my own self and, you know, get it out, you know.
Right.
And by this time, you know, I had met my amazing wife
Mhm.
as a rock in my life.
Yes.
You know, that at that time when I went back to AdSeg in 2012, and like I told you, I was defeated, and all I
Mhm.
had was the Bible. Thanksgiving came by, and they come to my cell and they're like, "Hey, you have a visit," and I was like, "I don't get visits on Thanksgiving. Everybody's over there eating turkey. Like they're
Right.
not thinking about me." And you know, I walked out to the visiting room, and at that time, she was my friend, who
Mhm.
is my wife now, and she was there, and I was like, "What are you doing here? It's Thanksgiving. Like, why aren't you? You're not with your family?" And you know, I was shackled. I had lost already like 20 something pounds. You know, being in the desert, working out in the heat and everything. And she just like looked at me, and she was just like, "What have they done to you?" Because I was like, you know, really defeated. And she said,
Mhm.
"I want you to know one thing." She said, "God loves you." And when she said that to me, "God loves you," it just like, I was like, man, I was like, you know, thank you for telling me that because I needed to hear that, you know.
Yes.
Our friendship continued. In 2015, we got married. which is interesting because I was like, this lady that's very intelligent, professional, and I was like, you want to marry me? I'm like, I'm never going home. And I told her, I'm not dying here. And I'm like, why are you wasting your time here with me? You know, and she said, God is going to set you free, Carl. She would
Amen.
always tell me that. She was like, God is going to set you free. She's like, I
Mhm.
believe that God is going to get you out of here. And I was like, okay, you know, and now 2015, we got married. And, she's been part of my journey. You know, she's been that rock,
Right.
and she went through all my denials, which was very painful for her, for my mom, but now I'm doing all these things, and I'm sharing. I'm like, man, this healing process has started, with the therapist and everything. And 2016, I'm going to the board for the fourth time, and I'm ready. And and it's like everybody's hyping me up. They're like, Carlos, you're gonna get out. They're like, man, you've done everything, dude. You have all these things, right? And it's just like my head is just like, oh man, I got this, I got this. And I went to the board, and it was just, I got my ass whooped really, really bad for 4 hours. And I went in there thinking, that, I'm having a date. I already owned up to all my past.
Mhm.
There with these commissioners, and they're like, uh, "What did you learn from this class? What did you learn from that class?" So I'm talking, and then he said, "Okay, what about your college education? What about this? What do you use this philosophy with?" He's like going off, right? And I'm just like answering, and at the end, he's like, man, he's like, you have an answer for everything. He's
Mhm.
like, I just think you're an intelligent gang member. And I looked at him, and I was like, you guys asked me to prepare myself. You guys asked me to change. You guys asked me to go to school.
Mhm.
Everything you guys have asked me to do, I have done it. And now you're going to turn around and tell me that I'm an intelligent gang member? I'm like, I'm not a gang member. And if I'm intelligent, it's because I have worked on myself.
Right.
And at the end, they're like, well, we're going to give you a 3-year denial because we just feel you're not ready. And we'll see you next time. And I remember stepping out, and I was just like, they're never going to let me out. I was like, these people are just playing with me. And I walked back, and I had a lot of friends now waiting for me on the other side of the fence because they all thought I was going to go home.
Right.
And when I stepped out, I remember they came up, and they're like, what happened? You're gone, you're gone, you're gone. And I was like, 3 more years, and everybody just like got really silent. And they're like, I heard one of the guys said, if they're giving him a 3-year, then now we're not getting ever out. And
Mhm.
I walked back, and one of my dear friends, he's a really good friend of mine. He lived across from me. He came over. He's like, man, Carlos, he's like, I know you're gonna get up from this, and you're gonna continue. And when he said that to me, I just started crying like I've never cried in my life. Like I hugged him, and I cried, I cried, I cried. And then I went to the phone, and I cried more because I had to call my wife. I had to call my mom, and they were like, what? Like three? And I was like, yeah. And I cried the whole night. And the next day I didn't go to work. And I went out to the yard, and there was nobody outside on the yard, right? And I ran into this guy who was in one of my substance abuse classes.
Mhm.
And man, Carlos, he's like, I heard what happened to you, with your denial. And I was like, yeah, man. I was like, I guess I'm just gonna stay in here, and it's not gonna happen. And he sat next to me. He's like, man, he's like, you have helped me a lot. He's like, with my addiction and with all these things, right? And I was like, well, that's what we do, right? And he's like, well, he's like, I'm gonna help you now. He
Mhm.
goes, you're educated. He's like, you've done all these things. You have everything you need, Carlos. But he goes, you have moved away from the one that has given you everything that you have now. He's like, you have moved away from God. So he's like, there's service on this day. He goes, and you're invited to it. And I like looked at him, right? And I was like, okay. I was like, I'll be there. And he's like, he's the one that's gonna get you out. And when he walked away, I got up and I looked at the fence. But you could see the desert, like you could see the fields and everything, right? Because in Havana was fields. And I looked, and I could see the city, which I couldn't see, right? But in my mind, I was like, with God, I'm gonna get through this desert, and I'm gonna get to my house where my family is at.
Right.
And I remember I said, get up and continue fighting, but this time I'm gonna do it with God. Not
Mhm.
school, not another degree, not more, God. And I went to service, and from that moment all the way, that was to 2016.
Mhm.
2017, they came by and they were like, "Hey, we need 7 guys to go to Solano to be certified as drug counselors and everything." And that's where I tell you, good officers, right? My
Mhm.
supervisor, he was like, "Carlos, you're gone," and I was like, "I'm not trying to leave, man. Why are you sending me up north? Like I'm doing all this thing, right?" And he
Right.
puts me in the office and he closed the door and he's like, "Look, man," he's like, "I know you probably never heard this, but when I look at you," he's like, "Man," he's like, "you're like a son to me." He's like, "And I see how hard you work." And he's like, "Man, I know it hasn't been easy. You've been in rough places." And he's like, "Man, you're always trying to help people out." He goes, "So," he's like, "if you go to Solano, you're gonna be in a program that's gonna allow you to take all of that stuff that you have from your past and just completely put it behind you."
Mhm.
He goes, "Do me this favor and take the program." And he goes, "You're gonna make me feel like a father sending his son away to college." And when he said that to me, I was like, I never thought I was gonna hear a cop said that to me.
Right.
I was like, just for that, I'm like, I'm going. I
Right.
never thought you would say something like that. So,
I bet.
and he laughed because it was interesting, right? A couple of weeks prior to that, Jen, he tells me, "Hey, Carlos, there's people from Sacramento coming," and he goes, "I need you to do a gang seminar." And I was like, "Okay, I'll do a gang seminar." And he goes, "How are you gonna do it?" So I said, "Well, I'm gonna bring somebody from this gang. I'm gonna bring all enemies. I'm like, I'm gonna bring all the enemies for one thing." I said, "I want them to speak the truth."
Mm.
And he's like, "You sure you could pull that off?" I'm like, "Let me go talk." I started talking to people, right?
Mhm.
And I always tell people, when you talk to somebody with respect and they see the work that you do, doors open for you. Because I went to people that heavily involved and I said, "Look, I'm not trying to disrespect nobody. I'm not trying, I just simply want to speak the truth.
Right.
You guys have kids, you guys have family. I know you guys don't want them to be killed out there because some gang member passed by it and sprayed everybody. Oh, I was trying to hit my enemy, but I sprayed this whole family. Oh, my bad."
Mhm.
This is what's taking place out there. This is what's happening out there. And I was like, you guys are invited to it.
Mhm.
When we did the seminar, there was 150 people in there.
Good.
Uh, the seminar was live streamed to Governor Brown in
Okay.
Sacramento. So we're doing all these things, and this officer is like, "Carlos, they're gonna remove you out of this yard. You're gonna get stabbed." He's like, "I don't know what I'm gonna do to save you," but he's like, he's like, "I don't know how you're gonna pull this off." And I said, "With the truth." I'm like, "We
Mhm.
just gotta speak the truth. We're not gonna do name calling. We're not gonna point fingers. We're just simply gonna say the truth.
Mhm.
We want better for our communities. We want better for our children.
Mhm.
We want better for everybody involved." And we did it, and it was some amazing, amazing people that spoke on that seminar. And at the end, it was crazy that everybody's like shaking. And then we had some young people that were like 18 years old, first timers. And they were like, "Man, we never heard nobody speak like that about, the
Yeah.
lifestyle, And I was like, that's what happens, man. You have a
Mhm.
lot of people telling you, "Hey, do this, do that." But when you find yourself in trouble, you're the one doing the time. You're by yourself. And the sad thing is that your family does the time with you.
Yeah.
Not your home, it's not everybody, it's just the people that really cares about you.
Mhm.
So it had an impact. So through there, they're like, "Hey, Carlos, we're sending you over here to Solana, right?"
Mhm.
And the first time that ice, boom, pops up, right? And they're like, "Oh, well, he has a ice hole." So nobody that has an ice hole it's allowed to go to this program because they're like, "For what? He's gonna get deported. He shouldn't be on this program." I had my officer, his supervisor, a warden, like all these people wrote to the warden over there and said, "If you want a good counselor that has a good heart,
Mhm.
Take Carlos. They're
Right.
like, you have to take them. And this person, like, they made a phone call. And she's like, I never had somebody call for somebody like that. And but she's like, we're just gonna bring you in.
Right.
And in 2017, I was on my way up there.
Wow.
And it's interesting how God puts everything in place,
Mhm.
because of course I didn't want to be far away from my family, right? But when I got to this place, Alano, the first person I see is an officer that I was like, man, this officer, I've seen him before. And now he was, ISU gang coordinator and everything. So I'm just like, okay. But in the program that we were doing to get certified as a drug counselor, he used to come in and talk to us, right? So I was able to talk to him, and I was like, look, man, you know my past, you
Mhm.
see my file, but this is who I am today. If you look how I do my program, when I go to the board, I'm like, is there any way that you will write a crime and just simply say, hey, look, I see his steps now, and he's
Mhm.
no longer that 15-year-old kid. He's no longer that person from Pelican Bay, from all this level force that he's been. He's no longer that person. I'm
Mhm.
like, that's all I'm asking. I'm like, but I'm gonna do it with my actions so you can see. And he was like, all right, cool. So I started doing my training and everything, and the board comes up, and it's my fifth board, and I'm just like, well, here we go again, right? And the ISU officer, he passed by because I was at the training facility for in the same program that my friend that you interviewed, Julio, was
Yes.
in,
Shout out
OMCP.
Julio.
Shout out to Julio. I mean, shout out to him and a lot of the guests that I've seen your videos, and it's
Yes.
amazing. I was watching Karen's video. Shout
Oh,
out to her.
yes.
Amazing.
A lot of love,
Amazing.
Karen.
Yes. And I'm doing the OMCP, and he passes by, and he's like, hey, he's like, you're going to your board hearing tomorrow, right? And I was like, yeah. I'm like, did you write that chrono, a little piece of paper? And he's like, I was on my way out, and I looked in and I saw the commissioner that you're having. All right. He's like, I spoke to her about you. And when he said that, I was like, you're lying. And he's like, I spoke to her about you. That's it. He's like, that's all you need to know. I was like, all right, cool, thanks. Next day I go in there, all these emotions are flying. I'm prepared, I'm ready. I'm like, here we go again, right? I go in there. And prior to going in there, there's two other individuals that go before me. One gets a 7-year denial, and he was already in for 37 years. And when he came out, he's an older gentleman. And he
Mhm.
was like, man, they just gave me 7 years. I was just like, oh, I was like, wow.
Mhm.
Then the other guy goes in and he comes back with a 5-year denial, and I'm just like, oh, great.
Right.
So when this guy comes out, his attorney was this lady that was my attorney in the two prior hearings. And she's like, oh, hey, Carlos, you're hearing. She's like, I'm going to go in real quick and talk to the commissioner about you. And I was just like, don't, because I just seen what's happening here. And it's not good. I was like,
Oh no.
but she's like, no, you'll be fine. So she goes in there. And like I said, Jen, it's been already a year since that, a friend of mine told me, hey, get closer to God. And that's what I did. I started going to service every day, reading the word, you
Mhm.
know, talking with my wife about the word. And it's like, it was there, I was like, God, you're with me. And, this is you, man. I'm like, put the words in my mouth, and, let your will be done.
Amen.
And we go in there, and I go in, and the commissioner's like, I never had an attorney come in and an ISU gang coordinator to speak about somebody. So she's like, nah, I'm interested in knowing more about you because these people come and talk to you, talk about you in here. I was like, all right, so here we go again. But this time I was able to get everything out. I was
Okay.
like, therapy has helped me with this, to have an understanding that this took place when I was a child, and it
Mhm.
this to me, it did this. So I was able to put everything together that led up to that one night where I made that poor decision. And then I said, and then I continue because I was still dealing with all that trauma. throughout all my prison term is out until I was able to start that process of changing, healing with my mother, making amends to my victim, like getting a complete full understanding of how I got here. And I'm like, and today I could tell you about it, without leaving anything out,
Right.
And she's like, okay, cool. Here we go, 4 hours. Boom, boom, boom. She's like, okay, step outside. I go out. And I remember I was praying and I was just like, I'm like, I can't do nothing else. It's done.
Hmm.
Within 15 minutes, they come in. They're like, oh, they're done. Let's go in. And I'm just like, oh, this is quick. This is a no right away. A no. And I went in there and I sat down. And I remember I put my head down like this. And
Hmm.
the commissioner's like, sir, she's like, why do you have your head down? And I remember I just said, because I know you're going to give me a denial and it will be the same story all over again. And let's just get it over with. And I looked up at her and she just like looked at me and she said, boom, she hit the recording and she was like, on the record, we're back on here on it. Woo, 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 woo. And today we found you suitable for parole. And when she said that, it was like, I'm like looking at her and it's just like I just felt the tears coming down my eyes because I was like, did she say that I'm going home?
Yeah.
And she said, you're going home. And I like looked back and I was just like, I just started thinking, all my life since I was a kid, I was like, man. And she said, I'm really sorry. She goes that you had to spend so much, you grew up in prison from being a kid. And she's like, I'm really impressed that in the last 5 years, she said, you have done so much to show me that you're ready and that you're no longer a threat to society.
Hmm.
She's like, I hope you go back because I brought pictures of my nieces and I was like, man, this is the people I want to I be able to hug
Right.
after and see. And she said, "You ready to go?" And the officers, they were with tears and everything. I was just like, man, I stepped out and it was just like those moments that I came out and I got on my knees and I was like, man, thank you, Lord. I was like, because I know you're giving me another opportunity in life.
Yes.
And I walked back and I started, seeing my friends and I'm starting to, sharing with everybody and everybody's crying. Everybody said, man, Carlos. And I call my family, everybody's excited, everybody's happy. And the wait comes, you have to wait, all this process, and
Hmm.
it was just very I started suffering from anxiety.
Mm.
I remember I started feeling like I was gonna pass out and I was just like, man, so much stress.
Yes.
And through all this time I'm just like, I'm gonna get out and I could never forgive my victim, because I always tell people, I know a lot of people it's like, man, do you guys understand the victim? And I'm like, I can only imagine what they go through. But
Hmm.
what I share with people is that before I was a victim, I said I was a victim too, and I've been able to process and heal from it. And I just wish the same for the victims, that they find peace and comfort and understand that some people do change, because I cannot speak on everybody. I will
Right.
speak on myself. I was able to change and I wasn't given my freedom. I earned it by showing through my actions, my work, and my dedication. And there's a lot of people that have done the same, and there's a lot of people in there that are doing the same,
Right.
and like I always tell people, man, I said, when you start practicing, compassion, empathy, a lot of things could change, and
It's true.
life looks a lot better when you start looking at life like that. You cannot fight violence with violence, hate with hate, because you don't get nowhere. And that's why I do what I do. I continue to work and to tell you how it all came down. They came and they said, "Hey, this is your papers. You're about to get released. Now we just have to wait for the governor to sign
Right.
on it." And right now, I was like, "Okay." So by now, I was a youth mentor in Solano, and
Hmm.
every Monday we had class. So that Monday I went and I'm talking to the youth, excuse me, and we're just discussing things. And one of the guys comes there like, hey, the supervisor wants you.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay. So I go, and she's like, hey, what are you doing next Monday? And I was like, oh, well, I'm planning this for the youth and everything. And she just like leaned over and grabbed this paper from her machine, and she's like, no, you're not. She's like, you're going home. She's like, the governor signed on it, and she's like, that's yours. And I was like, I looked at it and I looked at her, and it was just like, it just, but it was crazy, Jen, because at that moment there was a lot of lifers in a lot of those groups that I spent time since they were kids too. And I was like, how I'm gonna tell them bye, because I'm like, this is family. We have become family. And
Yes.
walking out, I didn't have to say anything. They just saw my heaven, they saw the paper, and a lot of them started crying. They were like, man, we're happy for you, we're happy for you. So I went on, and I worked until Thursday because during that week I got a call and it was ICE. Now they were like, oh, we're thinking about picking you up. And I was like, you're thinking, or are you? Because I have my family coming. And they're like, well, we don't know, but we're thinking about picking you up. You have an ICE hole, and we're thinking about picking you up. And I was like, oh man. So I called my family. I was like, I don't know, but just wait. If I get out, I'll wait for you guys out here.
Mhm.
I'm waiting, but uh, I worked till Thursday. I went into the OMCP,
Mhm.
goodbye to all my friends and everything. And one of the guys was like, "Why did you work till the last day?" They're like, "You already have your day. You could be sitting over there." And I was like, "This is my new life. This is
Mhm.
the opportunity that God has given me, and I will work every day. You know, especially when it comes down to helping somebody else.
Mhm.
How I'm gonna live my life now." And that Friday came, and some of my really close friends, they started crying, and it was really like that moment that I was like, "Wow, I'm leaving." And I looked at them, and I was like, "You guys will get out too." I was like, "You guys will get out too." That guy that I told you that in 2005 in North Kern, that I told him that I would see him go home. He
Mhm.
went home a year before me, and I saw him go home. And the day before he went home, he called me and he's like, "You told me 10 years ago that you were going to see me go home." And he's like, "Carlos, I'm going home tomorrow." And I seen him go home, and I was like, wow. So it's like all these things that happen that is just like doing the right thing. It's just doing the right thing.
Right.
And all these people changed, and they earned their freedom, and they're out there being productive members of society. And a lot of them work in counseling places. They're helping the community. And
Absolutely.
it's really nice to see them do that. And I always talk to them, uh, and they're good people. They're still doing the work out there. So that Friday that I come, I'm walking towards R&R, and there's a line that takes you to being released.
Mhm.
And as I'm walking, an officer calls my name, and he's like, "Hey, get out of the line." And I was like, "But I'm getting released." And he's like, "No, you're not." He's like, "Those guys back there, they're here for you." And I looked, and all I seen was chains, and I was just like, I can't believe this. I was like, they're gonna arrest me. And I walked over there, and they were like, "Oh, you're so and so." They're like, "Turn around." So I turned around, and they were like, "We're taking you in for your eyes hold and everything." And I was just like, it's one of those moments that I wish on nobody, because I was like, I was just feet away from being free, and I'm being arrested. And I was like, I have to remain positive. And I was like, okay, and we're driving to Sacramento, and we got to the ICE office, and the officer's like, "Oh, hey, here, sign these papers." And I'm
Mhm.
like, "What are those papers?" They're like, "Just so that we could get rid of you, send you back to your country." And I was like, "This is my country." And they're like, "You're not from here." They're like, "We're sending you back to your country." And I was like, "I've been here since I was a kid." Like, I'm like, "This is my country." And they're like, "Just sign your," and they're like, "Dude," one of the officers like, "Dude, you've been in jail for like more than 2 decades, and you still want to remain?" Because he's like, "We're not gonna let you out." He's like, "Just off the top, you're gonna sit in jail, and we're gonna keep you in jail. Into the only way you're gonna get out is if you go back to your country." And I told him, I said, "Are you the judge?" Because I could see a judge, right? And he said, "No, you
Mhm.
could see a judge." I'm like, "Are you a judge?" And he's like, "No." I said, "Then let me see the judge." And he was like, "Okay," and that that process, to make it short for your viewers,
Mhm.
took 2 years, in which I was placed in a county jail. So it's like you're relieving air. I went to the Yuba County Jail. Uh,
Okay.
if nobody knows about it, it's a county jail that's been under a consent decree since 1970 something for their abuse, lack of programming, all these things, right? And
Yes.
here I am being placed uh, in this place, and I was just like, wow. In that place, I experienced a lot of psychological abuse, a lot of officers saying, "Well, you're not from here. You don't like how we treat you. Sign the papers and get out." They're
Mhm.
like, "That's how we're gonna end this, right?" And all I was asking was like, "Man, can we get some soul? Can we get medical care? Can we get some program?" And their response was that, "Oh, you don't like how we treat you? Get out. You don't have nothing coming." And I was like, "Man, I'm like, everybody here is a human being. The only thing is that they weren't born in this country."
Mhm.
So that led to 3 hunger strikes, which I participated on, just asking for medical care and programming and better treatment and retaliation. They're like, "We got to get rid of this guy because he's getting everybody over here involved." And they were trying to send me out of state,
Mhm.
but we had met this amazing person from a group called Faithful Friends,
Mhm.
and they started calling the ICE office, and they're like, "If you guys send them to another state, we're calling the news and we're saying that you guys are retaliating on them."
Right.
So I ended up being sent to Mesa Verde in Bakersfield, and
Mhm.
I continued doing my time there. By this time, I won my immigration case for the first time, right?
Uh-huh.
Which the ICE officers like, "You will never win" and everything, but I won CAT, which is Convention Against Torture,
Mhm.
because I received multiple death threats. My family received a lot of death threats, my mom and everybody. And the judge said, "Look, this guy is rehabilitated. He's no
Mhm.
longer in society. They want to kill him, and he hasn't even been out there." So she granted CAT.
Mhm.
Here comes ICE, and they're like, "We're not letting him out." So they appealed. That appeal took forever. They ruled against me and said, "Oh, well, no, the judge was wrong and everything." So then I took it to the Ninth Circuit.
Mhm.
Ninth Circuit, the judges is like, "Why is this guy not here?" They're like, "He won his case with a lot of evidence, and it
Right.
seems like you guys have a personal issue here, and you guys don't want to let him be with his family." So to cut it short, I won my case, my immigration case, in 3 different occasions. And at the end, the BIA, which is the Board of Immigration Appeals, threw out the government's appeal and said, "Look, this guy has status in the United States,
Mhm.
which is CAT, Convention Against Torture, and he should be allowed back in this country."
Yes.
But by this time, the pressure was so much on me, Jen. It was already 24 years. I was diagnosed with high blood pressure due to stress because I never had any health issues
Right.
until I was sent to ICE. And when they were doing all these tests on me, they were like, "It's due to the stress that you guys are putting him through."
Mhm.
I was almost having a heart attack one day. And they took my blood pressure at 5 a.m. and the nurse told the officer, "This guy is about to have a heart attack. You guys got to take him out." The officer said, "I'll be back for you." That was at 5 a.m. It
Mhm.
was 8 p.m. and I was still sitting in the cell waiting for them to come. It was until the next shift that came in and they were like, "How did you guys leave this guy inside the cell with his blood pressure like that?" But by that time when they came, I had already done my yoga breathing. I had done all the things that I have learned on my own. I
Yeah.
read the Bible. I read all these things to calm myself down.
Good.
And I was able, but you start thinking like, man, these people are willing to let us die in here. Like they don't care that a nurse tells them, "Man, his life is in danger," and they just left me in there. So now I'm thinking to myself, I've done so much hurt to my mom, but the last thing I want is for her to have to come and get her baby in a wooden box.
Mm.
And that just put me on that position where I was like, do I want my mom to come and get me in a box and completely break her heart, or do I get out and just run and pray to God that He gives me an opportunity at life. And that's when I made that decision. I prayed,
Mm-hmm.
and while I was praying, I fell asleep. And in the night, I just woke up and I felt like my heart was gonna explode. And I just heard God saying, "Go, your time to go." And in the morning, I told the ICE officer, I said, "Look, I'm ready to go." And he looked at me. He goes, "Whew." He was like, "Finally." He's like, "We thought you were never gonna quit." And I remember looking at him, and I was like, "Are you gonna send me quick?" Or he's like, "You will be in the first plane out of here quick." Sure enough, I was out of there quick. They
Wow.
they moved me from there to Adelanto. Throughout this process, Jen, if it's okay with you, I want to recognize a lot of the people that support me, a lot of advocates. Uh,
Yes.
like I told you, faithful friends,
Mm-hmm.
that supported me, and a lot of people. CCIJ met some amazing people. I'm not gonna say their name; they know who they are. From
Okay.
UCLA, amazing people. ACLU, NorCal. My attorney, she heard my whole case, and she was like, let me help you pro bono. Like, I'm not gonna try. And she taking my case, so she's an angel. So that's ACLU, NorCal, Pangea, Centro Legal de la Raza, all these advocacy groups and
Mm-hmm.
family members and community members, everybody that I would tell them to see your channel so that they could see. They know how much I appreciate them, because when I left, Jen,
Mm-hmm.
I tell people I never want anybody to experience what I experienced. They took me to Adelanto, then they took me to Los Angeles, then they took us on a flight to Arizona, and they took us at the end of the airport where they had this like huge warehouse, and you walk in and there's like a bunch of like cages, and they stuff like 40 of us in like this little cage. And then when you're right about to ask a question, boop, they turn the lights off, and you're in complete darkness with 40 people. And it just dehumanizing, it takes your humanity, and it's like, man, like, the only thing is that I'm not an American and you treat me like this. And people don't understand that this is happening in the US, and it's happening in a lot of detentions. And it's to stop, because these are human beings. This is community members that are
Absolutely.
like that. So I want to send a huge shout out to all the people. If I
Yes.
forget your name, please don't be upset. I love you all, and I appreciate your support, because when I was deported, Jen, I was back in this country that I didn't know. And the first thing that welcomed me back was the police waiting for me, telling me, "Hey, you're so and so from this neighborhood." And I was like, "No," and they were like, "Yes, you are," because they had sent my file from my past. So it was like telling them that this is who I was, instead of them saying, "Look, this dude, a judge has said he's rehabilitated. The board of prison term has said that he's no longer a threat."
Mm-hmm.
And now these cops in the country I was born, they're like, "We don't want you here. We really don't want you here." And it was just, I didn't know what to do, because I didn't know nothing from over there. They're like, "Oh, give us an address." So all these threats started coming to me. "We're gonna disappear you. Like all these things." I'm just like, I can't believe that this is happening. But God always places His angels everywhere. And this nurse passes by, and she's like, "Hey, you're Carlos Salcedo." I was like, "Yeah." "Oh, I have your medication for your high blood pressure."
Mm-hmm.
So she tells this cops, like, "Can you guys step out?" So they all step out. And she's like, "Hey," she's like, "if you go with them," she's like, "they're gonna kill you." She's like, "You don't have no documents from here. They're already talking that they're gonna arrest you, and a lot of people that gets arrested here, they're never found again." And I'm just like, the only thing that came to my mind was like, my mom is outside. She's an American citizen. And she was like, on my break, she was like, just prolong everything, but she was like, do not let them take you because they're gonna kill you. She went outside, Jen, and she called my mom's name. And my mom was like, yeah, that's me. And she's like, if you don't claim your son, they're gonna kill him. So my mom went to one of the officers outside and said, look, I'm a US citizen and you guys have my son in there. Everybody already left, but for some reason he's in there. And if you guys don't let him come out, I'm going to the embassy.
Hmm.
This cop walks in and I'm looking or I'm seeing everything. He went and talked to this cop and he just walked in, slammed the door, and he came to my ear and he's like, you little punk. He's like, you're a coward. And he's like, when I find you, he's like, you're gonna regret ever coming back to this country. So he's like, get your shit and get the fuck out and run because if I find you, he's like, you're gonna regret it. I ran, Jen. I came out. This was the first hug that I was gonna give my mom, and I remember she was all like crying. I was like, I gave her a kiss, and I was like, Mom, let's go. And we ran, and I went from one jail to another jail because even though I was free,
Hmm.
hiding because these people had already made threats on my life, and I just stood inside a house. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I was going to do in my life. And it
Hmm.
was a moment where there's amazing people that I had just mentioned from all these places
Hmm.
contacted me and said, hey, would you like to do some advocacy work for the people that's inside of the Yuba County Jail? You spend 16 months in there, and we know a lot of the things that go in there are wrong. Would you like? Sure. They didn't know that they were giving me that hope again, and they were
Hmm.
just putting up that fire that I had said. I was like, I'm gonna go and do this work, and
Yes.
we started working. We started. I remember my first thing that they're like, "Hey, can you do a vigil, a prayer vigil for the
Hmm.
people inside?" And it was amazing to be able to connect the moms, to be able to talk to their family members, and that they were not alone. They had support and there was people out fighting, and it was just amazing. And from there, we started calling congressmen people. We started calling all these people, and by the grace of God, we're able to shut down this contract and all these amazing people that work on it. That was the last ICE contract that had with a county jail in California, and it was the Yuba County Jail. They were bringing in millions by keeping people in there, and even during COVID, when there was nobody in there, they were
Right.
still making all this money and abuse, lack of programming, lack of medical care, all these things that were in record, and they were still doing it. So it was a great victory to be
Yes.
able to shut it down. And it just opened other doors, like I said, for me to work with the Youth Justice Reimagined,
Hmm.
to help our youth. And it's not easy. Like I said, I was deported. I was able to flee my country again,
Hmm.
to keep myself safe. So now I'm in another country, and it's not easy. It's a struggle every day because I have no documents here,
Right.
but I do different things to make a living. I
Hmm.
teach, I clean houses, whatever it is to be able to pay rent. Uh,
Hmm.
my wife, she left her whole life in the U.S., her job, because she wanted to be by my side. And let me tell you, when a lifer gets out, they go through all this transition at home. My list was long. They were like, continue therapy, continue all these things. I
Hmm.
never had any of that. You
Right.
know, I talked to some of my fellow lifers, and they're like, man, Carlos, recently they were like, our journey has been so different because we got the help, we were able, and
Yeah.
man, that you're still on this struggle. You still like, it seems like this is never ending for you because you're still on this fight, and it's
Hmm.
like you're paying for what happened at that time when you already paid for it. You're being punished twice for it. And sometimes there's no job, but by the grace of God and the help of the community, because the people in the U.S. that I mentioned to you,
Hmm.
many people were like, hey, here, we're sending you some money. They didn't even know that they were helping me to pay my rent, to buy food to eat because I didn't have a job, and
Right.
it's not easy when you don't have documents. It's not easy when you start from zero. And I just been blessed to have my wife because she's the one that, hey, let's do this, let's do that. Because
Mhm.
I didn't get none of that help. You
Yeah.
know, I believe that God has a greater purpose for me. And I just want people that's watching your show to understand that, there's a lot of people in there that they do the work, they change. And I'm
Mhm.
an example of that because someone like me, a lot of people say, oh, I bet you he's going to come back to prison. I
Mhm.
bet you he'll go and commit crime because of, his past. And he doesn't have the support. But I've been putting in practice everything that I did on the inside.
Yes.
I've been holding on to my faith, believing that God has a greater purpose for me. And I remain positive, uh, and I continue to fight, and that's my story. I mean, it's long, and there's so many things that like I said, we could go on forever,
Yeah.
Jen, but
This
I'm just blessed to be able to share with you my story.
and you, let me just say, you are a blessing to others and a blessing to meet you. Congratulations on everything you've accomplished and all of that you've poured into others. And it's just such an honor to meet you and hear your story. And I can't wait for others to hear your story as well. What
Well,
what can people do? Is there anything that we can do to assist or help you in any way?
well, I still have so I have a pardon application,
Okay.
at the governor's desk. We're hoping that he understands my situation.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, myself, my wife, we just want to reunite with our family.
Yes.
And it's like I tell people, it's very painful to know that she left her whole life
Hmm.
over there to be with me. Because she's being the victim of them saying no to me when I have legally won every part of
Yeah.
my case. And
Yeah.
now she's being the one, taken away from the U.S. because they make you choose. Oh well, you could be here because you're a citizen, but then your husband's gonna be over there. It's like they make you choose family or here,
Yeah.
and she's chosen to be by my side. So I want people to understand that, I done everything legally.
Right.
I done everything that I can in my power to show people that I've changed. Um, and I continue to do the work. I
Hmm.
continue to always keep in memory, my victim and try to honor them in any way possible that I can.
Hmm.
But there has to come a time when it's like, well, he already paid. Like, how much longer can we ask him to continue paying?
Right.
So all these people that I mentioned you in the conversation, they created a page on Instagram,
Hmm.
so you can find me at Bring Carlos Home,
Hmm.
just like that. At Bring Carlos Home, and there's a petition that people could sign, which I ask everybody that watches your channel if they
Yes.
could sign the petition. That would be great support, or just follow the page because it allows other people to see the videos that are in there, and that's the way that people can support.
Right.
Because that's the only way that we're gonna probably get back home. By the help of the community.
Absolutely. I will be sharing that in the description of this video as well as on my social media platforms. You guys heard it here. Carlos did his time. He would jump through all the right directions and loopholes. And, you know, I feel like you did everything right and you've poured into others in ways that only somebody that went through what you went through can do. So I'm definitely going to be signing that as well. And I would encourage all of my viewers to do that.
I appreciate that, and everybody that's watching your show. I keep saying your show, your channel. Uh, there's hope. There's hope, and I always tell people just be positive, hold on to your faith. For those people that have somebody in there, be there because that helped me out a lot. Having my family,
Right.
and just remain positive. And don't forget that there's people in there that if you give them the opportunity, man, they could be the best version that they could ever be, and be productive members of society. People do change.
Yes.
Everybody's capable of changing, and I always tell people, because a lot of people say, "Oh, well, these crimes and everything." I'm like, if it was your child, would you want him to be given an opportunity, or would you want them to slam the door and said, "Done, over with"?
Yeah,
It's really easy to judge, but when misery comes near your house, then that's when you're like, "Oh, well, I want this." So let's just practice a little more empathy, compassion, and know that that's the way to do it.
absolutely.
We could accomplish so many other things through compassion and empathy.
That's right. I completely agree. And with that said, you guys, I will be sharing Carlos' information in the description box again. I thank you once again for sharing your story here on Convicted Hearts. I will stay in contact. You and your wife are in my prayers, and I know that the right thing's going to happen, and God's going to see this promise all the way through.
Amen. Thank you for the opportunity, and I appreciate the time. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Always, it was a pleasure, and we'll stay in touch. So, with that said, I want to let everyone know. Um, Check that information out I'll be sharing, and remember to always keep your heart convicted.